Module 11, Part 3, Negotiating and Next Steps. So as we talked about in the last lecture, only about a quarter to a third of students do a true internship. And so most students have to negotiate some additional learning or work opportunities with the employer. So here's some different ways to think about negotiating additional things you can do. To what extent can you meet different people and learn about their job? So, this might be a job shadow. Maybe it's a half day, a full day, maybe a quarter day job shadow. Can you have lunch with them? Can you have coffee with them? Getting a chance to meet different people in the organization. Typically, this is going to be something that your supervisor will help with or introduce you to those people, and then you can schedule these times to meet with them. To what extent might you be able to sit in or participate in staff meetings? Depending on the organization and their structure, they may not be able to have you participate, but at least being able to sit in on staff meetings, you can really learn a lot about how an organization operates and communicates. And then to what extent can you learn about or get exposed to some of the other things that maybe some people consider kind of boring or mundane, but if you're going to go into this area as a career, these are things you may have to know how to do or will be doing at some point. So learning about insurance or liability issues, human resources, how do they advertise positions? How do they recruit? How do they screen applicants? Can you sit in on job interviews with new employees? You really learn a lot by doing that. Planning what they're going to do, how they're going to do it, looking at budgeting or funding, marketing, accounting, things like that. Also developing a beneficial special project. So that's a requirement for our internship course, is that students have to do a special project for the employer. If it's a good internship, at the end you should know a little bit about most of the departments or divisions. Now, if it's a huge organization with dozens of departments and thousands of employees, it's probably unlikely you're going to get exposure to that many things. Maybe you get only exposure to the divisions within a department or something like that. So you may not be able to get to see everything. So one of the things that can be helpful if you're trying to get a position with an employer that's only had a few students work for them before and use that as an internship, or they've never had anybody work for them and use that position as an internship, is putting together an internship outline for the employer. This is a single sheet of paper. It lists an objective statement up top. Then it lists 4 to 8 areas of expertise that you possess. These would typically be applicable courses that you've taken, directly applicable work experience that you possess, and we'll take a look at an example here in just a moment. And then the bottom half of the paper, you would list maybe 4 to 8 or more items of goals and objectives. And so, what do you want to get out of this experience? So that top half of the paper kind of says, here's what I'm bringing to the table. The bottom half of the paper says, here's what I want to take away from the table. Here's what I want the employer to provide to me. So these goals and objectives could be specific learning goals. They could be tasks or duties you'd like to perform, maybe areas or departments you want to work in or at least get exposure to, and then ideas you might have for a special project. So here's a brief example of how this might look. You've got your name up top, maybe a statement that says 5 credit professional educational work experience for 400 hours, and then an internship objective to develop my skills and knowledge of how to operate a successful tourism enterprise. And then you've got these areas of expertise. So again, you might list 4 or 6 or 8 items up here. If you're going to list coursework, only list the title of the course, not the prefix or number, and then a brief description of what you learned and or what you did in that course. Of course, if you're listing jobs or skills you possess from jobs, then you can just describe those underneath this section. The bottom half of the paper, again, these would be personal internship goals. So, what do you want to learn? What do you want to do? Kind of the sky's the limit here. So what this document then does is it allows the employer to look at this and say, okay, here's what you're bringing to the table. We can have you use this skill and that skill. we don't really do that, so we can't have you use that skill, or we can't have you help with that because, you know, that's a liability, it's a confidential thing, something like that. And then they can also look at those goals and say, okay, to what extent might we be able to help you achieve some or most of these goals? And again, remember, this is not you're going to get to use all this stuff and learn all this stuff. It's a negotiation piece. So there's kind of this back and forth of what you're going to do. I've heard from employers where students have used this technique before, and they appreciate it because it gives them a chance to kind of get an idea about how they might use that student in their operation and how they might be able to teach or train that student. And so it's a win-win situation for the student and the employer. So after you've accepted a position, it's important to follow up and make sure you let other employers know once you've accepted an internship. You should always send formal thank you letters or at least an email if someone replied to you but didn't give you an internship, and for sure if someone interviewed you. Now, the reason why it's important to do this is going back to what we were talking about before. What if you get an offer and it falls through? If you've maintained professional communication, you've been courteous, you've been tactful with these other employers, you can always go back to them and see if they still have that position open or see if they're still interested in hiring you. And so if you've been professional with them, then definitely they're going to be a lot more likely to entertain that possibility. To get your internship approved, you'll look on page 6 of the NRRT 47 internship guide, and you're going to email assignments 1 through 3 to me. And assignment 1 is your current resume, so that tells me where you've been. Assignment 2 is an updated version of your goal statement from this internship prep course, so that tells me where you're going or think you're going for a career. And then number 3 is the internship approval justification form. So in this form, there's your contact information, the employer's contact information. You have to specify how you meet certain criteria, and then you're going to answer a set of 6 questions about the internship. So things like, what are you going to do for your internship? How does it fit with your career plan? What types of knowledge you might use from your college coursework? And so this justification form, there has to be a clear connection between where you've been, right? That's your resume, and where you think you're going, and that's your goal statement. So these things have to fit together. After I officially approve your internship, we will schedule a time to do an internship orientation session. And during that session, we go through the NRRT 47 internship guide. After the orientation session, I will override you so you can register for the NRRT 47 internship course, and then you'll get the internship agreement signed and filled out by your employer, and then I'll sign it, and then you officially start your internship. This concludes Module 11, Part 3.